You
I don't know why that hit me. I knew it, of course, but it didn't. I mean, I usually, most years, I do remember that. 1945, just before the surrender of Germany. Well, a month or so before. Quite optimistic, I'm thinking, timing on, after both of them having had quite a tough war. So, just the little curlicue from history.
Clarification, is this your first time that you're going to debate in the U.S., in Michigan at all?
In Michigan, yes.
Okay. So you've debated before?
Yes, often on C-SPAN, several times on C-SPAN. Quite recently in London, or not in London, Aldershot, right?
Well, yeah, but that was a television program with other people present, and not the same. We haven't done it one versus the other in front of an audience for 9 years,
and never on religion. So far.
Is that the main topic?
I think so.
I think it's going to come up.
If it isn't the main topic, if God isn't the main topic, what is?
I don't know.
Well, you would.
When I return the question,
you would say not.
No, it's the main. Religion is the foundational question. It's the underlay of all other questions. It's the debate now.
So you don't view this as something that's going to be repetitive because you've done it before. This is.
No, and actually the feeling that I've had very strongly in the last few months while I've known this is going to happen is that probably once we've done this we won't do it again, because I think that will be enough.
Well, I was asked this question earlier by someone from a newspaper here and said almost the same, which is, if this became a dog and pony show or regular routine, it would soon become inauthentic, despite our own innate seriousness, sincerity and so forth. It would become showbiz. So we're not going to have a dog and pony show. I wouldn't say I'd never do it again, but I think it should be safe, legal, and rare.
Okay. So people coming tonight can expect authenticity, if nothing else.
Well, that's a Hitchens guarantee. And seal.
Okay. You guys are brothers. Where did you part? You guys have different views on things. At what point, is there a point you can go look back and pinpoint this is where we started to differ, or is it just a different thought process?
Well, we're different people. Why would we ever have agreed?
I mean,
you don't start. We didn't start from one egg, and we would always disagree. There may have been coincidences from time to time, but just because you're somebody's brother doesn't mean you're the same person. In fact, in some ways, especially if you're younger, you're going to define yourself as not being the other person's brother. I once compared myself to Canada and its relationship with the United States, to which he replied he didn't realize I was relaxed about it as that. But, I am.
But the other thing is that I think people don't notice is how many things we agree upon. In particular, I think we both tend to dislike the same sorts of people and the same sorts of mentality, and say the recent past. This is a guess, but I bet I'm right. The use of the word misspeak for lie, or controversial for raging demagogue and thug, would strike us both as an abuse of the political process, trampling on the English language, easy free passes for people who shouldn't be getting them. I would say that without actually checking what Peter has written. I would feel I knew that, in the way that some people are said to know if their twin is having a migraine. Something I've never particularly cared about. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I could sort of test his temperature in that way.
Do you guys have any expectations for tonight?
No, it'd be wrong to compose the music of the future.
No, I think that it would be dangerous to try and script it in your mind ahead too much. I would much prefer it to be, I'm trying not to say spontaneous.
Precisely. Another very dread word.
Spontaneous demonstration means rehearsed
to mean anything over prepared or or affected. The expectation of fratricide, I think, on the part of anyone who has it, will be disappointed. It isn't really, I mean, it's not at all unusual, as Peter was saying, that brothers would be of the same mind or opinion. If we didn't live so much of our lives in print or on the air, people wouldn't notice. There must be many people who have brothers they don't that often see or that much agree with. The Rodham brothers, on the other hand, seem to be absolutely like two peas in a pod. So much so that their sister never gets asked about them. The brothers to whom she can't say no. Hideous Rodham boys. Just for associating.
That's fine.
Seems to me there's more pressure on you in this press conference.
Yeah, I know. I was kind of.
Would you like us to just answer some things you haven't asked, or
you can, free association's fine. That
I
works.
have questions to ask you as well.
Oh,
please.
good.
We'll pull up a chair.
Yeah.
My name's Jeremy Bean, and
Bean.
Bean. It's Irish.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Is it spelled like that?
Well, it's Anglicanized over here, so it would be the whole Brendan Ban.
Yes, Dominic.
Yep. So that's
And
the
Brian,
industry.
yes,
So
right.
I do a podcast called Reasonable Doubts. It's a skeptical podcast. It's aimed at counter-apologetics, and but we try to bring in a lot of dialogue too. One of the things we've been focusing on a lot, and I wanted to ask your impression, because both being from Great Britain, there's been news about Muslim no-go areas, these ghettos, supposedly, where people are becoming more and more isolated culturally and whatnot, and all the issues that relate to free speech. And I was wondering if I could get your comments in regards to what's going on in Europe over free speech laws and hate speech laws that are trying to curtail criticisms of religious faith and expression.
Oh yeah, but you want to go? He lives in Europe.
yes, there's a lot of. For instance, recently in England, laws were introduced for, I think, religiously aggravated crimes, and I'm trying to remember the exact phrase. The idea being that a crime committed would be worse because it was motivated through faith hate, which is a fundamental departure from the principle of English law, which is that the action is what is being punished.
Right.
In fact, the only time this has come up was a couple of weeks ago over an attack on an Episcopalian rector in East London, which is believed to have been done by Muslim youths, and they called him a rude word attached to the word priest. I know of another incident which took place in northern England a few years ago, where a Girl Guide leader was attacked on her way into a church by apparently Muslim youths throwing quite large stones at her and shouting "Christian bitch." These things do happen. No-go areas is, I think, something of an exaggeration. There are, particularly in parts of northern England and in London, solitudes. So you have people living side by side who have nothing whatever to do with each other. In Bradford in particular, large numbers of people whose families originate from Pakistan and who are Muslim live in the same city as it's the people whose families have lived there for centuries. And they don't really, they'll speak to each other on a bus or in a shop or in a place of business, but they would never go into each other's homes or have any other kind of commerce. That has definitely happened, and there are Muslim areas in which large, elaborate mosques have sprung up, usually on high ground, to demonstrate a position of supremacy, and where the churches are more or less empty. And in terms of what you can say about it, there is obviously a great limit because of the partly because of the fact that Muslims, though not entirely, but most Muslims in Britain are Asians, and therefore the issue of racial bigotry comes in at the same time, and people feel very restrained about what they can say for fear of being accused of racial bigotry when what they're actually addressing is something different. In the rest of continental Europe, particularly in the Netherlands and in Belgium, but also in parts of France, particularly Strasbourg, northern Italy and large parts of Germany where there's a very big Turkish population, there is a large and growing Muslim population which is making a greater and greater impact on the way in which people live, and penetrating the sky with more and more minarets. And it's, in my view, if people are worried about the Islamization of Western civilization, this seems to me to be a much more serious part of it than the frankly pumped up and overplayed wild panic talk about terrorism which we get all the time from our governments.
Oh yeah, my concern is over the right to criticize religion and not to for example, we have this a resurrection of the whole Danish cartoon debate and protest that's going on after what was it? Intelligence indicated that these cartoons that there was an assassination plot on one of these cartoons, and so they republished them. These debates are brewing up, and I often see hostility towards the people who are writing the cartoons and publishing in solidarity.
Well, I can help you out there. Fleming Rose, the editor of the Jutland Post, who commissioned and published those cartoons and gave his reasons why he thought it was time to do it, is a friend of mine and is one of the many friends I now have, not all of them European, some of them, who have to live under police protection now. And not because of any imagined terrorist threat, I might add, or any hyped or fabricated one, because of a very, very direct one, a threat of violence to their own persons and the magazines and other outlets of information and opinion that they work for and with. And I was the one who organised the demonstration in front of the Danish embassy in Washington, thinking it was about time the Danes saw at least a friendly crowd outside one of their embassies, just one day, made up of people who were not mainly motivated by hatred and violence. That's presumably why I'd have to tell you about the demonstration. It didn't get any coverage because it didn't threaten violence or practice hatred. The entire American media, with the exception of the Weekly Standard and a magazine I write for myself occasionally, well actually regularly, Free Inquiry, refused to publish as a news item the pictures that were in contention. In other words, people were told there's a fight about some images. In the age of the image, the completely image-dominated period of media existence, the images themselves were not deemed to be fit for showing. Now, come on, everybody knows what's going on here. And self-censorship is probably the very least of it. Anyway, or it would be if there wasn't actual censorship, or in other words, if the copies of our little magazine had not been pulled from the shelves of Borders Books. Borders Books says, you reprint those cartoons, we are not going to let you sell them elsewhere. So I will never do another reading in Borders Books. Small thing, Department of Empty Threats, just I won't, okay, and they know why. But to tell you this is in a sense to tell you some news, because I can't tell you the people who gave in because of threats, because telling you that would be telling you things that could be of use to those who are bringing the threats of physical force. So it's a very neatly wrapped up capitulation of a whole culture crying before it's hurt, when there actually is no threat that we could not, with ordinary pugnacity, just resist and say we won't be spoken to in this tone of voice. Surrender's prearranged and done in advance, without anyone being consulted. No reader, no voter has been even asked what they think about it, whether they would themselves accept a microscopic risk to defend the First Amendment and the values that underpin it. This, I think, is a really gruesome state of affairs.
How does, because people would argue that these images because they are intolerant and because they are bigoted, that's why
That's
we
not what they
shouldn't
argue.
publish.
They don't argue that at all. I've never heard that argued. It was made very plain to me. I live in Washington, it's my hometown, Washington DC, nation's capital. I know a lot of the people who are responsible for making these editorial decisions in newspapers, magazines, and television stations. And I know why they made it. So it was out of fear. Simple. They didn't say, we don't want to say something intolerant about Islam. It says, we can't stand the heat that we think might result. So they're anticipating. It's known in playground terms as crying before you've been hurt.
So in your view, this isn't misguided.
It is nothing to no. It is bodyguarded by a soggy multiculturalism. It says that the only kind of any variety, any diversity, is to be defended, except the one that insists upon diversity. In other words, it redefines diversity as uniformity. If I say the First Amendment and its rights include the right to be offensive to religious fanatics, you're just the one group that isn't quite covered by our wonderful, gorgeous mosaic of diversity and tolerance. I see, I understand, I get it completely. Why then? That's fine. Just don't call it diversity anymore. Call it uniformity and live with it. I think I have a right to insist on that.
The fear is not completely baseless, though, because
Damn straight it's not baseless. I know people who really do have to live under.
yeah, well, but most of us remember Theo van Gogh, who was murdered in an Amsterdam street.
Actually, ritually murdered, disemboweled, subjected to a ritualized religious killing as of a sheep or an animal. And his collaborator Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who's a very close friend of mine, now has to live under protection. So does Fleming Rose, the editor of the Jutland Post. So, until for a very long time, did my friend Salman Rushdie for the crime of writing a novel. No, there's no question that this is a serious threat. But then, where is the intolerance coming from? When those who say that the intolerance comes from those of us who resist and satirize this are preparing in full view, not a murder, but a suicide.
You should also mention, I think,
Well, not just a murder and a concession to murder, but a suicide. Suicide of free expression.
what is not yet, as far as I can see, a factor here, but which is certainly in several major European countries, which is that Islam is now electorally important. And so a lot of governments are trying to make accommodations with it. British government certainly is. The British government actually came up with the most extraordinary formula a few months ago in which it would refer to terrorism conducted by people who happen to be Muslims as anti-Islamic terrorism. You'll have to work out how they came to that formulation, but that shows the kind of contortions into which they have got in trying to cope with the fact that there is now a very large and growing electoral basis for political Islam in several Western European countries, and it grows all the time.
But because I already mentioned the word satirical, I will just tell you, if I lived in England and I cooperate with a lot of people who do live and work there, if any such legislation that equates attacks on religion or religiosity with hate crime or with racism is ever enacted or attemptedly enforced, I will certainly demand from the Department of Public Prosecutions that the next person who refers to a man who blows up a Shia mosque with its congregation in Iraq, the person who describes that person as an insurgent, be arrested for Islamophobia. I think that's the very least we can do. For those who deliberately, the only people we know of in the world who deliberately set out to kill Muslim civilians every day, and in the most gross way, and the most, if you like, it's not a word that's easily in my mouth, but in the most profane and blasphemous manner, at their devotions, on their pilgrimages, in their houses of worship, tearing and bloodying their holy books and their holy places, are the Islamist terrorists, the Islamofascists. Anyone who describes those people with euphemistic words should indeed be indicted and arraigned, if this law is to mean anything, for inciting and encouraging and celebrating the hatred and murder of religionists. How are they going to like to suck on that, I wonder? Because I'm deadly serious about it. If that's going to be the law, while I campaign for its repeal, and until it's repealed, I'm going to campaign for this application of it. And see how they like a touch of that.
Other than fear in the Islamic case, when we look at this as a broader phenomena, what do you think accounts for the double standard in which how we treat criticism of somebody's religious views as opposed to criticism of somebody's philosophical, political views outside of the realm where we consider them sacred? Or I'm just looking for a way to draw this into the
I still think it's the fear of being accused of racial bigotry,
okay,
which is the ultimate thought crime. If you commit that, then you're obviously flung out of the comity of civilized people. So that's the end, and people are very scared of that. And given the simple truth that large numbers of Muslims in Western countries do come from Asia, it's a very easy accusation to have made against you, and it's one people do fear.
It's a very easy one to defuse, though, that, I think. And incidentally, I don't think racism is a thought crime. The preaching of racial hatred is offence if it's not a crime.
Well, hang on. Should it be a criminal offence?
No, but I mean, it is, and I didn't say it should be a criminal offence.
I mean, I always thought that the race relations laws in
it's not what people are thinking.
In Britain in the 60s were actually justified because they ended the posting of notices in boarding houses saying no blacks and a number of other rather disgraceful things. So I'm ambiguous about that, but it is. In terms of how we order our society, is something you cannot do, and it's something you can't think. The fact that whether that doesn't to call something a thought crime doesn't necessarily dignify it as something which you ought to think.
No, indeed, but it's an utterance question. And when I say it's an offence, I mean it's an offence. It's an offence to me, not an offence to the law. But it can have criminal implications with it. But generally, I think everything should be both thinkable and sayable, and that principle matters more to me than the feelings of anyone who might be hurt by any violation of it. But it should be noticed that again, speaking about the country I know best in Europe, my country of birth, the warnings of what was coming by way of Islamist intolerance, by the way of the importing into Great Britain of communities from the extremely backward and feudal and underdeveloped parts of North Africa and Pakistan. People who were arranged marriages to cousins down the generations, and the terrible consequences such as deformed births that come from our second nature. People like Nadim Aslam, for example, who's written this wonderful book about the Yorkshire Muslim community called Maps for Lost Lovers, or Hanif Qureshi, who wrote My Son the Extremist, no, My Son the Terrorist, My Son the Fanatic, Hanif Qureshi. Monica Ali, the author of Brick Lane, Salman Rushdie, most famously. All of these people were telling liberal Westerners, we come from these Muslim populations. We know what they're like. Don't you let them get away with this. And don't you let them guilt trip you into saying the criticism of this is racism. Don't let that happen to you. All these people are friends of mine. I'm very proud to count them as such. Very important. And all of them, of course, are free from any religiosity of their own, Islamic or any other kind. Regard the emancipation of people from religion as the main emancipation that human mind, human society can hope to experience, which is my own view.
So there.
Anyway, in this country, it's nothing to do with them. I think the reason why I say Lawrence Wright wasn't criticized, Jeremiah Wright wasn't criticized till recently. Al Sharpton can be called in the New York Times, he's always called the civil rights activist. How did he get that to be called that? What has he ever done to get himself called that? Al Sharpton, has he ever done anything for civil rights anyone knows about? Active, yes. Active in pinching himself every morning, I'm going to get away with it again by this time tonight. 4 people will have had me on TV and sent me a limo and called me Rev. He can't believe his luck. All he proves is in this country, anyone who put the word Reverend in front of their name can get away with that. But that's not just a problem of people being reluctant to criticize racism. It is, unfortunately, a criticism of a great man who was murdered 40 years ago, Swede, because the decision by almost every white person in America to conclude that what the coloured folks like is a bit of shout and holler from the pulpit. They like a good preacher when they're talking about political and social and other kinds of freedom. It has been a hugely retrogressive thing. It's meant that the great black socialists and secularists like Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin, the people who actually organized the March on Washington and did the spade work to get it done, and the groundwork, and got the United Automobile Workers to co-sponsor it, great contribution from Michigan incidentally, are written out of the record completely. It's all preacher now. Preacher men. So anyone who can call themselves that, who can pose as a religious figure, whether it's Farrakhan or Sharpton or Jackson, these frauds and crooks and big mouths and bigots themselves, for the most part, gets a free pass from white society. So it is partly true what Peter says, that it's because of race guilt tripping, but it's also because of a totally exaggerated deference to men of the cloth that's also allowed frauds and crooks like Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell and John Hagee, and now the wonderfully named Ron Parsley. Is it Ron or Roger Parsley? Rod Parsley, a Woodhousian, new McCain evangelical demagogue in the Midwest, to flourish. Whereas people trying similar sorts of bigotry and demagogy without the prefix reverend wouldn't have a prayer, quite rightly. Or I mean to say, a chance. Wouldn't be given the opportunity. Would be right, lying to children for a living is a pretty contemptible way, I think, to go through life. And these guys do it all the time, and they get called reverend into the bargain. Woof. And if they were only lying to the children, when they rape and torture the children, they're only accused of abusing them. What would anyone be called who did that who wasn't in holy orders? Be called a rapist or a torturer. Now it's an abuser.
Or an organization.
This is a free pass given to the clerisy. All this should end. The United States should be much prouder of its secular constitution. I'm willing to stick up for it.
Peter, it looks as if a thought is just on the edge of you.
It's staying with it.
Broad pass.
Can I ask you all to replicate that wonderful discussion a little bit about whether Britain had to fight World War II the way it did when it came into the war and that sort of thing? That was fascinating. I don't think Americans know this thesis.
Well, just to give you, do you want to give them the backstory?
Well, only that there are two books.
Yeah.
One just published, one about to be published, Human Smoke by
Yes.
Nicholson Baker.
and Churchill, Hitler and the Unnecessary War, which Pat Buchanan will be publishing in May. And it was by coincidence we found that he was reading one and I'm reading the other, and they both have the same theme to some extent, which is that ultimately it is because of the failure of the Iraq War, which was sold as a good war and an idealistic war, using the Second World War in many ways as the template. Thank you.
That's okay.
The template for it, because the Iraq War has ended. If it has ended as it has, people then go back and re-examine the template, and they find that it wasn't quite as it appeared to be, and it isn't. And I think that the more you examine the Second World War, which most of us ingested as myth, the more you discover what actually happened, the more disturbing it is.
Though I think it could be said that Mr. Baker's been a pacifist for a very long time. His last appearance before, well, I won't say the cameras, but in the media, was a fictionalized fantasy about the assassination of President Bush as a woman, if you remember. Now, Pat Buchanan has long been a member of the Charles Lindbergh School of Politics, along with Gore Vidal, and actually quite a surprisingly large number of people whose backgrounds in America were with the America First movement. And what that means, in a sense, being officially dubious, no, not officially, dubious of the official explanation, justification of the war, that it was a response to fascist aggression, and therefore both just and necessary, and if you like, inescapable. But there have been revisionist books about this in Britain for some time. John Charmley wrote a big who was amazingly professor of history at Fulton, Missouri, where the Iron Curtain speech is going, an Englishman. Long account, basically saying that the war could have been averted, or at least postponed, in some of its more grave, fell effects, softened, if it wasn't for the great gusto and enthusiasm for war displayed by Mr. Churchill, whose political career depended upon belligerence, as it had always done. I think these things have to be sayable and thinkable.
And the idea that we were discussing earlier that Hitler needed war, he needed a nihilistic response.
Yes. Sorry, yes, there is another. Baker's given his book the extreme. Actually, Buchanan's choice of words is very cool, but it amounts to a very provocative title for a book. But the Nicholson title, Human Smoke, is. I haven't got to the stage yet where I know what he means by it. There is obviously an allusion in the book that I'm going to come to that will say why he's given it this title, but obviously you can tell what people are going to think. They're going to think about the final solution, which is what most people regard as the justification, if only ex post facto, for the war. And the difficulty with that touching belief is that it's quite probable that without the cover of war, there wouldn't have been a final solution. Without the night and fog and chaos of war, it would not have been possible to embark upon the mass deportations to the east and the massacres by whichever means they were conducted that undoubtedly occurred there. So, that being the case, and with our knowledge, some of it was available at the time, that Hitler probably didn't have very many years to live. He's mentally and physically in a very advanced state of decomposition by 1940. That any time spent running out his clock and wasting his time and keeping him in balk or in, what is the word? Well, in neutral, if you like, would have been time well spent. And there were forces in Germany who would in the end have seen sense about that. It's not a position one can easily or lightly dismiss. But it takes the axe to the root of the great post-war myth of our Anglo-American civilization, which was that jointly we did something grand, noble, necessary, heroic.
And as it's referred to in popular culture here, the good war.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Studs Terkel even, that's unironically called, though Studs Terkel, I'm sure at the time would have been for the Hitler-Stalin Pact. In fact, I'm pretty sure I remember him being there.
I think the Baker position is less interesting than the Buchanan one, because pacifism leads you to. I gather there is a statement in the book in which he describes the French capitulation in 1940 as a civilized.
Yes, he does. Yeah.
And given what followed from that capitulation, directly and predictably, I don't think that's actually a possible description. Once the war had begun, then I think it had to be fought, and certainly wasn't civilized to capitulate to people who everybody knew and had known since very early in 1933 were barbarians. This wasn't the Kaiser, this was something else.
No, it is indeed. I've just got. That's where I was at lunchtime today. I was reading this passage of praise for Philippe Pétain. Though he so far, Mr. Baker, has left out the Hitler-Stalin Pact. He's included Guernica and Kristallnacht, but he's not included a lot of other grim stuff. But I suppose he's going to have to deal with Vichy now, what France made of itself. And the question is really for him whether pacifism does involve a certain kind of degradation, a sense of loss of pride.
Nor do I think he included some advice which I believe Gandhi at one stage gave to the Jews of Germany, which was to commit mass suicide in protest at the way they were being treated.
Masada.
Well,
now Jonathan Schell tells me that that's not true.
I'd like to see the.
But there are some remarks
that
that he makes that are quoted by Nicholson. There's some Gandhian piffle babble that is quoted by Nicholson that comes quite close to saying that. It comes close to advocating immolation as a means of appealing to the German conscience, or I better say the Nazi conscience, to make it clear how absurd I think it is. But Jonathan Schell is a very honest guy, and I think he's by far the most expert and scrupulous, punctilious pacifist known to me. So, he was writing a book about Gandhianism and not else. Tells me that story is legend. I do think some of what Baker quotes Gandhi as saying in his own newspaper, signed articles, comes perilously close to that. It wouldn't be a huge misrepresentation, actually, of what's already said. But the numbers, you see, he says it might be that several hundreds of people have to immolate themselves to bring about the necessary shame on the part of the persecutors. He doesn't say the Jews of Germany should all kill themselves and save the Nazis the trouble. It's a narrow but deep distinction. Perhaps I could put it like that. Anyway, I mean, this argument's going to have to be had, and this generation would have had to have it without, I think, without Iraq. Because the concept of the just war has to be fought over again in every epoch, in my opinion.
Thank you for those very thoughtful answers. Any other
Well,
questions?
and not to say voluminous,
Hey, we want more.
exhaustive, exhausting answer.
You're not a big fan of Hillary Clinton,
No.
but is there a candidate you support?
Though I'm really not, and I took as much happy as disgusted and enraged by her terrible narcissism over Bosnia and what it conceals, which is her own role in making that such a big disaster and such a big nightmare in the first place. I hope that has completely ruled her out as even thinkable president of the United States. But if it weren't for that, I would have to say, just not out of gallantry, the way she has stood up to the sort of pasting she's got lately on the, and the sheer willingness to get up every morning and do it again, as if nothing would discourage her, is energy worthy of a better cause. I'd like to think she would have done that to save Bosnia rather than just to use Bosnia and its mass death as a means of advancing her own career. But sometimes you think it's possible to think of her caring about something other than herself. I say that very reluctantly.
Well, to use an allusion familiar to you, she is an iron lady in her own right.
No. She's no. Iron ladies do not say the boys are ganging up on me. You can't imagine Thatcher.
Oh, she was just doing that to be opportunistic.
No, she's done it twice now. And also, Thatcher did weep publicly at the memorial service for those who fell in the recovery of the Falkland Islands, but I don't think she ever welled up in any other way.
Oh, she did when she was expelled from government.
Oh, perhaps she did that, yes.
She did.
Well, I saw
Well, you would.
I was there in Paris.
Tear was photographed.
Maybe brushing away a fractional one.
No, it was when she was actually in the
loving
car
one.
on the way out of Downing Street. The tear was brilliantly photographed. It was there.
Right.
Unwiped.
That was the night it was all over.
That was it, yeah.
The night when she was first voted out, when she was in
Yeah, she didn't
away,
believe that.
I
She
was
still
there
thought-
on the steps.
She
said, I'll fight
still
on
thought she'd make it.
with the British in the Faubourg Saint-Honoré. And I also met, in my time, I met Benazir Bhutto several times. I've met Mrs. Indira Gandhi. I did not meet Mrs. Golda Meir or Mrs. Bandaranaike, but the women who really had to put up with male-dominated societies and real male persecution are not self-pitying and whimpering in this awful way. I think that if I was a female or a feminist, either, that I think would get me down a lot. You either are as tough as, or you are not. Or as humorous and ironic and determined as, or you're not, or you aren't.
Maybe the difference in our positions.
Can't have that both
I
ways.
think deep down she is tough, and this is all handling. This is show your warm side. I think it's calculated. I think she is tough inside.
Well, she is when it comes to her own interests.
Yeah, she is. She's relentless.
Yes. Well, I saw her shed a tear for herself in New Hampshire, as did everybody else. What I'd like to know, what I said in my piece, is it conceivable that if it was pointed out to her, as it has been, that her telling Clinton, her husband, her disbarred, perjured, impeached, professional liar husband, to stay out of Bosnia in the first place probably cost 200,000 lives. Would that thought make her shed a tear? I'm willing to bet you everything I own that it would not. She could not, it's not conceivable for her to imagine her shedding a tear for another person. That is what I'm looking for. And I think I've found it. And what it means is she's a psycho. Like him.
Peter, you have thoughts on
No, I think we had an agreement in 1776 or around about then that we stayed out of this. Sticks to that.
no outsider's perspective?
But
We have enough problems of our own.
I gather she's joined a very extremely conservative religious group now. validate her faith claims, which are the latest incarnation. And now I noticed that Senator McCain has stopped being an Episcopalian and become a Baptist. And I see that Senator Obama has joined some rock and roll, shout and holler, horror show, has been for a long time. So it looks to me as if religion is poisoning the campaign in a big way. And it's, every candidate seems determined to defame and trample upon the one thing that makes the United States the great country it claims to be. You don't have to do any of this, and the government can never tell you you can. It's a real shame. And I hope they're changing ships on a falling tide as well, because all the evidence says that the number of Americans who are not impressed by supernatural claims is the fastest growing group in the country.
Look at the books that have been selling. Sam Harris, you.
Yeah,
there's
but
been a sea change.
you read the Pew study. The largest, it's 15% of Americans now say they don't identify with any denomination at all. 40% of it change their denomination at least once. The ex-Catholics are, or the lapsed, as the church insists on calling them, because you can't leave, as you know, a totalitarian church. You're not allowed to leave. You can be excommunicated, you can't leave. Something that people don't understand very well, is the largest group in the country. But the fastest growing group are those who don't identify. And they are regularly insulted by candidates who act as if they don't exist. Well, they do, we do. And that's to say nothing of the huge numbers of people who do say, yes, I'm a Lutheran, or a Catholic, and who aren't really. And who are riddled with doubts. And,
the two speeches that are getting so much comment in this campaign are McCain's speech on his Mormonism down at the Bush Library and the Obama speech in Philadelphia, where he's trying to transcend the racial issue, religion. So.
Well, to say nothing of what got former great Michigander out of the race, yes. I mean, that was disgraceful. I mean, if you remember when the Carolina primary was in major contention, he didn't even go, I think, to the state. He stayed entirely in Nevada, where his campaign was run entirely by a Mormon sectarian machine, in order to eke out a narrow victory there, entirely based on a confessional turnout and donation, making himself the Mormon candidate.
Yeah.
For a crackpot, racketeering sect. You know, no one can look at the Book of Mormon or the history of Joseph Smith without realizing that they're seeing a plain fraud being evolved in the clear light of day, to roars of laughter from its originators.
I mean, you don't want to be able to control your wife's
it's
destiny?
enough to make a cat laugh.
Whispering the secret word.
Have you read Fawn Brody's book on Joseph Smith?
No.
Well, God damn. You know, the local newspapers of upstate New York draw a perfectly good picture of a many times convicted, very, very charismatic fraud.
So, Peter, are you saving all your piss and vinegar?
Nothing more.
I don't want to. Look,
Nothing more.
How many of you are there here? I mean, look, let's say
Gosh,
we're supposed to do this and jump around and get into our shorts.
It's been a fantastic campaign from the secular point of view, because of what the crying lack of missing quality. So becoming increasingly, what we want is less faith-based pretense, less faith-based hypocrisy. Why do they insult us by thinking what we want to hear as professions of? We don't. We want competence and integrity. We don't want professions of supernatural allegiance.
Can I ask you what you think?
And that, by the way, is true. I should just say one more. That's true of people, I presume, who are honestly and sincerely religious. They do not want to hear their own faith exploited.
yeah.
Or cheapened in this
Yeah,
way.
no, I think that's true. Let's keep this
But
last.
let's hope it's a big miscalculation, this religious content.
Yeah.
I think it probably is.
We got to scoot here pretty soon. The last question.
I just wanted to ask what you think what role does the media play in that?
In this aspect of it. Lazy, I think they tend to make the assumption that a person who's made a claim of faith has ticked a box that the electorate expects them to check. And I think that it's an unexamined assumption that could stand a lot more examination. And as I've told you, I think I'm very ashamed of the way the profession behaved over the Danish cartoon business. It's happened again this week. Sam Harris was asked to do a piece on the revival of the Danish cartoon question by the Washington Post, and they're not going to print it, and they've more or less told him why. Because he uses this idea of religious violence in the same sentence as the word Islam. And they're not willing to run that risk. And they can't have expected he would avoid the question. And they can't very well ask him to forbid himself to speculate on it. So it's a combination of cowardice and consensus. Actually, Cowardice and Consensus would be the name of any book I wrote about any aspect of the American question.
Well, hopefully the high grosses you guys are getting with your books will change the media a little bit.
No, they won't.
No.
They won't.
Well, thank you very
Yes,
much.
thank you, Frank.
Well, please.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.